joining us today. My name is Sarah Wilkinson. I'm a senior product marketing manager here at SonicWall. I work primarily with our MDR managed firewall offerings as well as endpoint. So I spend a lot of time dealing with the SOC. I am joined today by Corey Clark, our
Oh, hi.
VP of Threat Operations.
Me. I feel like we're doing a podcast. It's be like, oh, you're like, hi, I'm Sarah. And I'm Corey. I'm the Vice President of Threat Operations for Managed Security Services over here at SonicWall. Welcome, everybody. Great to have you here.
I love it. I love it. Corey also deals with the SOC
Deal with the
because that's
SOC.
what
And
we
I
do.
deal with all this tree pollen. So I'm gonna disclaimer. I'm gonna apologize to everybody. I'm drowning. The pollen is killing me slowly here in Tennessee and spring, and it's not a good time. So please bear with me. A little cloudy, but we'll get there.
So Corey, we're here, we're kind of looking at kind of some things that have changed in the industry. We're kind of talking about this concept of secure by default. And so, kind of one of the things that we kind of look at is whether, is cybersecurity just about technology or, how does technology play in? And I think one of the things that, we talk about a lot here at SonicWall is the cybersecurity tech stack creates a great deal of operational complexity. There's a lot of tools. The configurations can be inconsistent and difficult to manage. But, before we kind of get into some of those specifics, what do we mean when we say secure by default? What are we talking about here?
It can mean a lot of things, actually. So recently, I'll say in the last 6 months, I had a lot of our partners approach me and say, hey, we're switching over to a secure by default philosophy, right? An approach. And I was shocked at the first they came to me about that and said that they were taking that initiative to go by that. And then the different meanings behind what it means to different people. Now, for me, when it comes to secure by default, it's easy, right? It means your security is already turned on. Everything's already hardened by the moment a system comes online. Already done. That's one example of what that means. Another example can mean when it comes to something like responses. So secure by default for a lot of our partners and how they're implementing that strategy is, hey, if you see something anomalistic, I don't care. Take mitigation steps. Contain the situation. Lock out that device. Lock out that user by default, because if something happened that is outside of what I already have hardened and configured, I don't care. We're going to immediately take those mitigation steps to prevent any higher risk.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing too, if we kind of zoom out a little bit, right, and we look at the entire environment in the cybersecurity agent industry, and we kind of look at how organizations are thinking about cybersecurity, one of the things that we see all the time, both when we go to trade shows, Corey and I travel a lot for trade shows, when we talk to partners out there, but also just when we talk to partners, there is such a focus on technology, right? And on having all of the different pieces of cybersecurity technology in your tech stack. And make no mistake, we're a cyber tech company. We believe in technology. We have a number of really good ones, for you that we would love to talk to you about at some point. But technology is only one part of the picture. And one of the things we're going to dig into here in a little bit is around configurations and the use of that. But what I really want to kind of double click on, what we have here on this other slide when we talk about where breaches are coming from. They're not necessarily coming from sophisticated exploits. They're coming from environments that really were never hardened in the first place. And one of the reasons that those environments are not truly hardened is because people are overly focused on having all of the pieces of technology, and they're not thinking about how those pieces of technology work together, and they're not thinking about the people and the process that manage those pieces of technology. They're not thinking about how are we going to stay on top of these configurations? How are we going to stay on top of all of these alerts? So
You know,
Corey, as we move
too many.
forward,
I
sorry,
want
go
to
ahead.
continue off that real quick. There's too many tools. Plain and simple. There are way too many tools, way too many configurations, and then it's almost impossible to have an expert to properly tune these because we're kind of following the bouncing ball of trying to okay, well, I need this tool now. I need this tool. This organization saying, hey, their tool is going to save my world, right? And if I don't have them, everything's going to blow up on me, and all of my customers are going to be compromised. It's just there's too many things out there that are creating a significant amount of operational complexity that organizations just can't handle.
Yeah, 100%. So, Corey, we're going to kind of dig into this a little deeper. But before we do, I just want to call out that we are going to try to take some questions at the end. So please feel free to drop any
Ooh.
questions as you think of them in the questions panel. It looks like we do have a note in there. It looks like somebody may be struggling with audio. We've checked in with some of the other folks that we know are on the call, and they're not having audio issues. So you might consider refreshing if you're struggling with that. But Corey, kind of diving into our conversation here, what are we seeing here at SonicWall in terms of the most common entry points for
Yeah,
hackers and for
slide
network
here.
access?
So everybody that's ever been on a webinar with me knows I love this slide with the house because it helps me give that analogy and help kind of show um, what's happening, right? So first, and just how it correlates to security. So first thing we have to account for is how are they getting in? What are the most common entry points? Well, stolen creds, plain and simple. So you can go out there on the dark web, you can find these stolen creds, and they're being reused because we're humans, we're creatures of habit. We use the same things over and over again. And so, a common scenario I talk about is still the number one attack that we're seeing is business email compromises, people falling for phishing emails. So what they're doing is they're giving up their credentials. So adversaries aren't breaching you, they're actually just logging in, right? That's a common term that we use, and that's what's happening. So I can take that business email compromise, pivot over to your firewall as an example, and this is why we've been talking about SSL VPN for so long, because that is one of the most common entry points that we're seeing. Credentials get stolen, they use those credentials, they get in through your SSL VPN. Then there's the issue where we have MFA fatigue. We've been talking about MFA for over a decade now, but MFA is still one of those things where a lot of our partners' customers, or even inside their organization, some of their higher figures, right, are refusing to use MFA, and we're allowing them to do so. And so now we're responding once a compromise occurs. Then we can still talk about, if Michael was here, we'd get up that our favorite slide that talks about all the common points like open RDP, exposed remote access, whether it's VPN, whether it's exposed RDP, we still see that out there. I've seen a large uptick, and I've seen it a lot, but recently in the last 2 weeks, a large uptick in remote admin tools. So stuff like Screen Connect and all, these common tools that are being used by organizations to help administer their machines are being exploited by adversaries.
Yeah. So I want to kind of help people think about this maybe a little bit easier and a little bit kind of we love analogies here at SonicWall. Corey and I, we love analogies. We use them all the time. And probably our favorite analogy when we're talking about all of the security tools in the stack and the ways that they work together is, let's think about your house for a minute, and let's think about all of the various security things that you have going on in your house. Now, obviously, you have a front door and you probably have a back door, and you have locks on both of those doors. But hey, if somebody gets your keys and they know that your house is your house and they know that they have your keys, they can go try those keys in the door.
You
And at
let your
some
key
point,
under the mat. Most common spot.
exactly.
Left it right under the mat. It's the first place they're going to look.
Yep, 100%. Now we go into the detection tools, right? And so this is something that we see a lot is people will spend a lot of time and money implementing detection tools. So in this case, if we're thinking about your house, we have things like cameras. We have things like maybe you've got a dog that goes absolutely nuts every time anything, comes down your driveway. Well, here's the thing. If you're not actively watching that camera all the time, it's not going to do anything when it sees the guy come up and start banging on your windows. And your dog probably barks at the Amazon driver, the mailman, the guy delivering your pizza, as well as the guy that's coming up and does not have a good plan for your house, right? And so it's very difficult to parse through, like, just because those things are detecting that something bad is happening in your house, or if we're talking about our security tools in your environment, if you're not constantly watching, you're going to miss it. But also, they can be very noisy and they can alert too much. And that's really where having the response tools come in. That's where, maybe if we're thinking about like a smoke detector, right? That smoke detector, if it goes off because it smells smoke or it detects smoke, it's going to go off until the cows come home. But if you're not home to hear it, it's going to do you no good. If you are home, great. Then you can make the determination of, oh, is this something to worry about? Or did, my child just burn a piece of toast? But if you're not home, you don't know that.
So that's and that's
And
that's the uncomfortable question that I
yeah,
ask people all the time, right? Is so what failed in this scenario? Did your smoke detector fail? Because you did it, you bought the tool, you installed it, it works. So the smoke detector was going off. There was a fire in your kitchen. You weren't at home to hear it. So did the smoke detector fail you, or did the lack of capability of monitoring and response fail you? And that's what we're seeing in the industry. Again,
Yep.
so many cool tools out there, and we're putting all these tools in our environment, assuming and hoping that they're going to save us, right? And they're going to help us significantly with our day to day and making sure we're not getting compromised and waking up to a bad morning. But again, as you've been saying, it's not about just having the tools in place. It's about properly configuring them and using them to your advantage for any type of scenario.
Yep. For ongoing, right? Because the threat landscape continually evolves. So management of our security stacks, management of our configuration has to evolve in the same way. And so that kind of leads us into something else, Corey. So what are we seeing that's really changed over the course of the last, call it year and a half or 18 months?
Well, I talked about it earlier, right? The amount of tools that are out there. Think about how many antivirus and EDR solutions that are out there, how many firewalls are out there. And then now we're stepping into the AI reality. And everybody is freaking out about AI. You can't have a conversation in cybersecurity now without talking about AI. There's a lot of scenarios out there where everyone says if you don't adapt to AI, it's over for you, right? You're going to be out of business and you got to get out of it. So we're having to adopt to that. We're having to try to be relevant at the same time. But then again, we're buying these shiny tools. We're implementing solutions without fully vetting them, without fully properly implementing them. And we have this kind of fear that if we don't implement some of these tools, we are irrelevant. And again, we're not doing proper service to our clients, to our customers.
Yep, 100%. And something that we've seen a lot on the marketing side of things, so how a lot of these security tools are presented in the marketplace, there's a lot of hype, right? It's sometimes these tools can be presented as a be all do all. This is the one thing that you need. This is, the latest greatest thing. And the simple reality is if there is one tool that claims to do it all, it probably doesn't do it very well because security is complex. It does take a combination of tools to effectively manage security for an organization. A really good example of this, we see it all the time in MITRE attack evaluations, right? The MITRE attack guys over at MITRE, they put out, here's what we're going to evaluate on this year. It's a specific threat actor, it's a specific campaign, whatever. And, you'll see some vendors will come out and they will get green across the board. They'll do really well and they will tout it. Hey, we're 100% in MITRE attack evals. They did really well against that one specific threat actor. If you pay attention from year to year, you'll see that, sometimes they pick a threat actor that perhaps that particular security vendor doesn't do so great against. And so then the security vendor says, we're just not going to do it this year. You've got to be careful. We've got to be careful with some of these marketing claims, and we've got to approach them kind of with reality and knowing that it takes security as a team sport, right? And that's true for our technology as well as for the actual people.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the people is, as it says there, people crisis. Part of the problem that we have a people problem in general. When it comes to skill set, and I talked about this earlier, right? Where we're putting all these new tools, we're expanding the amount of tools, we're expanding the amount of dashboards. There's going to be a skill issue, right? Especially if your lead engineer is dealing with all of the ticket escalations. They're also doing projects like 365 migrations. They're also supposed to be your security guy. They can't be that heart surgeon for every single thing that you're implementing in your business. And then there's operational overload, like I highlighted earlier. There's just too much going on, and we don't have enough people. So all of this is becoming an issue. Like, yes, it's a good story for AI, but that still involves people in some form or fashion. The job market out there is difficult. I log into LinkedIn and there's just so many people, especially higher level people, looking for jobs right now, right? It's because a lot of organizations are blindly just throwing AI in there to try to fix that solution. Well, now you're losing a lot of that skill set that you previously had. Now, when there's an issue, you don't have that capability. And so now you're pivoting anytime you're being reactionary when something occurs.
Yep. 100%. And we've been kind of talking about this evolving and expanding attack surface, because we have threat actors trying new things and experimenting with new techniques all the time. So what are we seeing in terms of like a bias between threat actors successfully exploiting 0 days versus maybe exploiting some of these configurations that are perhaps out of date, and maybe the hackers are just simply logging into the network.
Yeah, I'll die on that hill any day of the week, right? Where it comes to the majority, I can't put a percentage. I'll say I'll say 85 to 90% majority of compromises are coming through misconfigurations. They're not again. I made that comment earlier. They're not breaking in; they're logging in because we're handing them those credentials. We're handing them access into what they're doing. Yes, 0 days are relevant. 0 days are a thing. We're seeing it with the VPN where we're releasing a brand new firmware update. We've patched a bunch of holes. The adversaries, what they do is they take the previous configuration, they take the newer configuration, the new firmware, and all of what we've done. They're putting it into these tools that now, instead of months, within a day, we now have new vulnerabilities, new issues. So yes, 0 days are a thing. But the most common, I can tell you, over 90% of what I've had to investigate come in from just things that should have been plugged, things that they didn't realize or someone has modified in the past that they didn't plug. So there's, credential abuse, there's exposing services to the public, the public space out on the internet. Access controls, we're leaning towards making things easier. And it's, yes, don't get me wrong, it's a fine balance between usability and security, but unfortunately, we've been leveraging far too much ease of use over, secure by default, what we're talking about today. And then, yes, we all have, just like MFA fatigue, we all have patch fatigue, right? We're not patching because we're scared of what's going to happen. I mean, I've been in the whole Microsoft patching world for over 20 years, and I cringe every time I think about Patch Tuesday coming out and what I have to patch servers and how many blue screens over my career I've had to deal with from patches. So, yes, we have fatigue around patching. So we just leave unpatched vulnerabilities out there. But in the real issue of it, as I've been saying, is we have to account for these misconfigurations and lead with those first. Yes, configurations won't always save the day because there'll always be some type of 0 day that comes out every day, week, month at some point. But we need to start with that initial configuration.
Yep, and a big part of that is really thinking about the layers of security, right? Just like I talked about in your house, the basic thing you can do is lock your front door, right? And also not leave your key somewhere that it's really obvious. But we probably have some additional security beyond that. We have cameras, we have some of the detection tools. All of these things are, they put up barriers for some of our threat actors, for some of these hackers, right? Like, just because a hacker finds one way into your network, that's not necessarily his end goal. He's probably going to hang out there, he's going to dwell there. The average dwell time in SMB environments is up anywhere up to a month. Really, it can be just a few days all the way up to 4 weeks. And they, in that time, they are learning about your environment, they are bouncing around, living off the land, digging in to see what they can actually get from you. It's not just, oh, I, snuck in through a firewall, or I snuck in through maybe a phishing email and a piece of malware, and now I'm deploying this thing and I'm getting out. A lot of these things can be very sophisticated, and that's where these security stacks really are really crucial. So Corey, as we're thinking more about this, and we're thinking about kind of how these tools work together and the configurations that we need to stay on top of, are we seeing a migration to more modern configurations, and what does that really look like?
Yes, but unevenly is the best way I can explain it. So I've hit on it. I've harped on it. I've harped on it for a long time about stuff like MFA. Yes, it's still a big issue, but we are seeing more adoption of MFA. So that's great. We're seeing improvements to endpoint solutions because endpoint is the catch all be all goal of an adversary. And so we're seeing adoption to more sophisticated solutions. We're starting to see more organizations realize that the third party scenario that we'll be talking about later, the importance of having a third party, of having full fledged monitoring. Um, the words getting out around identity. Identity is still the biggest pain point of anybody. That's still the 80 to 84% of daily, weekly, monthly, yearly alerts that my SOC send come out strictly around identity. So we are still seeing some fragmented, implementations of policy improvements, of acknowledging and going in and auditing and not realizing that's not a set it and forget it scenario, because engineers will be engineers. At one point, I was an engineer. I have someone calling me pissed off they can't log in, so I'm going to make a change. Just I'll deal with it later. So we're seeing more organizations, provide that or following that auditing and starting to look at compliance structures. I get a huge smile on my face. I'll never forget it. I was um, at a conference and an MSP came up to me and said, "Hey, tell me how your solutions align with these controls." I was like, wow, someone not just asking if they can have some swag, and someone that's a great question, right? Let's talk about how these align with the controls and going through that solution. So the word's getting out there. More organizations are starting to account for these. So there is some adoption, but as I said earlier, right, it's uneven across the board of where we're kind of picking and choosing to improve these configurations.
Yeah, for sure. And so kind of tying this all back to our kind of our larger question around what it means to be secure by default. Is secure by default a kind of a one and done thing or a set it and forget it thing? What should folks expect in terms of ongoing management, maintenance, that kind of thing?
Gotcha. I was gonna say, is there another slide? Did we forget to advance? I love the saying. Secure by default is a posture. It's not a project. It is not a one and done. Projects are you do something, you complete it, you implement it, and you're done. You move on to the next project. That is not how security should ever be considered. Consistent validation needs to occur. Like look at vulnerability offerings. So I love talking about vulnerability solutions, and there's some solutions out there that say, "Hey, I just need scans once a month or once a year," and I'm like, "That's horrible." No, new vulnerabilities come out on a daily basis, so it's not just a single vulnerability check project. This should be an ongoing solution for you. You should be constantly scanning your environment for new vulnerabilities that are coming up so that you can patch those. So treat it like a posture and not just like a project.
Yeah, 100%. And I just want to, we're going to kind of lead into talking kind of about the third party portion here in a minute. But if you're a small or a medium-sized business and you're, maybe an IT person and you're kind of in your job and you're kind of hearing this and you're thinking, gosh, like, how do I balance this? You don't have to do it by yourself. This is where third-party providers can be really helpful. This is where, working with an MSP or an MSSP can really help take some of this off of your plate. It's for a number of reasons, right? Like it's not that you can't do it, it's that all of these things are changing so quickly. What you really need is an expert who's going to keep an eye on the broader threat landscape for you and let you know what you need to actually do. Because the thing about it is being secure by default really only works when it's continuous, when security is delivered consistently and it's operated continuously. Frequently, that means with 24/7 monitoring. Corey and I are very passionate about having that 24/7 monitoring and response, but that's only one piece of the puzzle here. The vast majority of organizations don't have that capability, they don't have the bandwidth or the capital to go build that for themselves. It's just not possible. And even some of our partners here at SonicWall, some of our MSP partners, they don't necessarily have the bandwidth to be able to do that themselves either. And that's where security is a team sport. Partners really can make it possible to deliver that continuous operation, that continuous monitoring, that continuous research to know what needs to be done, what configurations need to be updated, what 0 days might be out there that require immediate attention, and really identifying what are the most important priorities for your organization. You don't have to do this alone. And it really working with third party partners, which we here at SonicWall we're really passionate about, it also helps deliver security at scale. Something that I've talked a lot about before, if you've read any of my blog posts or if you've been on previous webinars with me, it doesn't matter if you are a two-person ice cream shop. At some point, you are going to be a target, right? At some point, you are going to probably get hit. Not because some hacker is sitting there researching Corey's ice cream shop in Tennessee, but because you're going to get hit with a spray and pray attack. You're going to get hit with phishing, and then you're going to have the attention of that bad actor at that time. And they're going to say, okay, what else can I get? I snuck in the front door. What's here? And the way to stop that is with sophisticated security tools that, frankly, if you're that small ice cream shop, you probably don't have the capability to manage. That's why we come to partners. That's why we work with our MSP and our MSSP partners. And that's why our MSP partners work with folks like SonicWall to make sure that they're providing the effective security solutions and monitoring and have the people behind it so that that Venn diagram that I showed at the beginning, the people, process, and technology, that we're all in balance there so that we can deliver effective solutions. It also, these partnerships allow you to extend your team, do more with less. We're all overstretched. It's just the nature of the market right now. Corey alluded to it earlier. We're all being asked to do more with less. When you work with partners, you can extend your team, and that's true both if you're a small business or an MSP partner, right?
And that's key when picking your partners, right? Is find a partner, not a vendor, plain and simple. They should be that extension of your team. And I get that question all the time of, what's the value of having a third party SOC? Why can't I do it myself? You know, then I start asking questions. Do you have a dedicated team? Do you have a dedicated team of security experts? How are you receiving your threat intelligence? You start looking at any third party SOC, and there's a great chance they're monitoring thousands and thousands of environments across different industries. And the amount of threat intelligence that comes through that, it's very difficult for a small organization to have because we've been talking about it. The adversaries are constantly pivoting, they're constantly changing their tactics. You used my love language earlier when you were talking about MITRE, right? The tactics and techniques are constantly evolving. And so trying to do this yourself, it leads to potential failure. I've talked to a lot of organizations that have a lot of the tools that we use. And so I talk to them about how they're, ingesting it, monitoring it, responding to it, because some of them are just a water hose of events. You look at an EDR solution, you look at monitoring any type of network device, you look at any monitoring of even identity in Office 365, and you're going to receive just a water hose spray of alerts consistently on a daily basis. And I've seen too many organizations struggle with just, okay, we got it, we'll do it. And I've seen they move these alerts to a different inbox and they say they look at it once a week. Well, once a week to me is, again, the equivalent of only doing a once a year vulnerability scan. You're failing yourself because by the time you realize there's an issue, it's too late. That's what a third party brings in. You have those experts that extend your team to help you provide, in this situation, continuous monitoring.
Yeah, and you said something that I love about looking. Don't look for a vendor. Look for a partner. And just to kind of put this into a nice little bow for what we've been talking about here, yes, there is so much operational complexity in security because you have these tools that are necessary. You have a lot of noise in the marketplace about here's the next big thing, here's what you need to be truly secure. That third-party partner can do several things. First of all, they can tell you what you actually need, right? They can help you make decisions about what is going to be best for your environment. But on top of that, good partners are also going to help all of those security tools work efficiently and effectively together. We kind of talk about a single piece of stained glass, helping them become this beautiful thing that is going to help keep you together and everything fits together well. Often when we try to do this ourselves, we kind of have a hodgepodge of security tools. They don't talk to each other. There's all kinds of streams of telemetry that are just kind of in the ether. A good partner, and who can also be a vendor, but that good partner is going to help you make sense of that. And that's really important to really achieve that secure by default posture. So we'll hit a couple of key takeaways here, and then it looks like we've got 2 or 3 questions in the question box, and we'll get to those in just a minute. I think, Corey, the biggest key takeaway that I think I personally want everyone who's listening to this, kind of have is security is an ongoing effort. It's not a one and done project. I know we just spent like 10 minutes talking about that, but it bears just underlining for everybody, right? The other key takeaway here is yes, security technology is important, but we would really encourage you to not get distracted by shiny new tools. Your security stack needs to work for your organization, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you buy the latest and greatest thing that happens to be on the floor at RSA. You need to make sure that it's going to fit together and really provide the defense that you need.
That was the perfect call out, RSA. Hey, that's what RSA is. It's just a look at me
But
solution. Look at all of my
I
cold
think
storage.
it's next week, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, and then finally, 0 days matter. The things that are happening that you see in the news, all of that matter, all of that matters, but not paying attention to your security tools, not paying attention to your configurations, that's like leaving your door unlocked, right? Like if you are going to make investment in these security tools, you really need to pay attention to how you are actually going to use them and what your management of those tools is going to look like. Firewalls constantly need updated security rules. They need new firmware to defend against threats. EDR tools, endpoint antivirus tools, they also frequently need updates and new security rules, all kinds of things. You've got to think about that rather than just writing a check to get the technology. Corey, any closing thoughts before we jump over to questions?
No, I think hopefully we've nailed it. Hopefully it makes sense. You know, the biggest thing I want people to remember is it's a posture, not a project. This is an ongoing evolution. Start looking at your configurations, start looking at security implementations that you've implemented, start looking at your relationships with your vendor slash partners. And yeah, we've, like I said, we've adapted ourselves to this security by default posture with a lot of our partners of just having those communications. When events happen, how would you like us to respond? Here's our default response. But if we now have a tag for some of our partners that are on this secure by default posture, where we know, okay, if this happens, take an immediate mitigation step and follow that particular playbook. This is what it's coming to, because it's vital that we start looking at this and implementing it in this fashion instead of, again, just looking at it like a project.
Yeah. So we've got a couple really good questions. We also have a couple of kind of housekeeping questions. So I'm just going to address those really quickly. So yes, this webinar has been recorded. You can access it via the same link you used to join it. You should also get an email once we're done here with a link to the recording as well. And then just make sure you take a look at some of the attachments that are attached here if you want to learn more about some of the things that we've talked about today. So Corey, our first question. If bad actors are taking the firmware changes and comparing them against AI, aren't developers doing the same thing to try and identify new entry points?
So yes, we're doing the same thing on our side. But when you start looking at, this is why as an industry we're saying, and I'm particularly double clicking on SSL VPN. This is where why the industry as a whole, not just SonicWall, not just Fortinet, not just Cisco, everybody is looking at SSL VPN and how vulnerable it is. It's an older technology that gives way too much access. And so that's why the adversaries are constantly targeting it. And no matter what we do, I mean, we come in, we go for like, you can use AI to say, hey, I'm creating this new code. Help me make sure that someone running this won't be able to do it. It's going to happen. Just like, again, new vulnerabilities are going to come out, new malware is going to come out. Every security solution is going to end up being fallible because there's always going to be a way to bypass. And that's why security vendors are security vendors. That's why I have a job as a SOC. There is no catch-all, be-all, silver bullet that will ever completely protect us. And you have to start looking at the biggest vulnerabilities in your environment, and start accounting for those. And that's why, again, you start seeing, and I'm not going to call out any other vendors' names and specific to this, but that's why, like, when we release a new patch or a new firmware, we're going to have another one within a day, within a week, right? Another vulnerability that's coming out. We're seeing that across the industry where it's all these new patches, all this new firmware that are constantly being put out. I saw a vendor recently put out, I think, 3 patches within a week time frame because the previous one immediately got compromised.
Yep, 100%. So, okay, we've got another question here. Does SonicWall offer a document that provides instructions or suggestions to harden an appliance out of the box?
So I believe
I-
we do. There's a lot of KB articles on how to use these. We've even started our own service offering, because just because you implemented it that way out of the box, you implemented it that way the first time doesn't mean it's going to stay that way. And so that's why we implemented a service called MPSS, where we're providing those consistent checks, those consistent reporting. And so that's what we've done to help circumvent, or to allow to make sure that it's continuous configuration. But yes, there are KB articles. I don't have the direct link to those. Do you know?
I don't have the direct link handy, but certainly, if it, we can follow up after, and track down the and get the actual link. Just to tack into MPSS, with MPSS, you do benefit from the Sonic Sentry network operations team with your firewall management, and that's, that can really help take some of that load off of you, whether you're a customer or a partner.
So it's not a question. This is also a prime example of secure by default when it comes to your endpoint security solutions, where I am seeing more organizations using, if the product itself has the ability to do an immediately isolation or disconnect that device from the network, it's helping come in and save the day.
Western Energy implemented SonicWall capture client best practices, disconnect from network recently. It detected hidemouse.exe, and on the third detection, disconnect from network was activated. Remote access.exe, screenconnect.exe were being used by the hackers to do their dirty deed. Oh, I love that phrase. It appears the original payload, Adobe Acrobat Reader.scr, came in via an email message. The hackers were on the computer for 11 days. Windows 11 events applications and reliability monitor help put the pieces together. So it's
True.
just a
Yeah.
really great example of secure by default there. And then, Corey, just one other question here. So, if we're thinking about how all of these things in the stack work together, and we're thinking about kind of the need for that constant monitoring, how do we make sense of all of those streams of telemetry, and how does somebody how do we really take action on any of that and correlate any of that data?
Yeah. So first off, how does an organization know what they need to do? First off, talk to your partners. Again, that's a difference between a partner and a vendor, right? Look at what the industry is doing as a whole. So, as I explain a lot in some of my webinars, I talk about my perfect partner that I'm providing monitoring for is feeding me three important levels of telemetry: endpoint, cloud, and network. Those three levels of telemetry allow me to correlate events. Now, in that example, they were using Capture Client, which is a OEM version of Sentinel-1. So Sentinel-1 can detect something malicious. So, okay, cool. A security operations center can do their job and tell you, hey, this appears to be a compromise just with the information that Sentinel-1 will provide you. Yes. But if I'm able to pivot over into stuff like your Active Directory logs, and because Sentinel-1 will tell me the account that was compromised and that was doing these dirty deeds, as this person said, right, doing these dirty deeds was C. Clark. If we have the ability to go in and say, okay, show me where C. Clark logged in the last 2 minutes, 2 hours, 2 days, 2 weeks, I can start getting a scope of, okay, where is this account touched to help me identify what's the scope of this potential compromise. Cool. Now I can pivot over to your firewall logs. I can look to see, okay, what do my VPN logs look like? Is this organization using VPN? What do the logins look like? Is there anything that didn't initially trigger an alert that I can actually put together in this case of this particular event or incident? Now I can also pivot over and look at, okay, is there exfiltration? Because when it comes to firewalls, especially, the smallest firewall will give you over 1 million logs a day. Human can't go through all of those logs. So you have to start using solutions like an XDR solution that can weed through that, use machine learning. Here's the AI term again, right? That we can identify and start pulling out anomalies, like looking at a 5 minute period and looking at common outbites and saying, okay, there was an anomalistic amount of outbites coming from that machine that we saw the Sentinel-1 alert coming from. That gives me an indicator that there was potential exfiltration, a higher confidence in that. I can pivot over to your cloud logs, say, okay, as this particular incident, there was this started from email, business email compromise. I said that at the very beginning of this webinar, still one of the most common attack vectors and of what's happening at entry points of how they're getting in is just initiating a business email compromise that the end user is following for. So with that being said, we can pivot over to your cloud logs and start looking for is there a VPN starting to be used to log into Office 365 as an example? Am I seeing it coming from a server farm from the same country? That's what we're seeing the majority of adversaries doing. They've gotten smarter in their tactics and they're not attacking you from outside of the country that you reside in. They're just pivoting into server farms inside of the environment. They know that we're looking for VPNs, so they're using less of those. So if it just comes from a server farm that's not marked as a VPN, there's a high likelihood, though less likely of them getting detected. So being able to correlate across, I know I just went rambling without any presentation or visual of that, but Being able to correlate between endpoint, cloud, and network telemetry is key and crucial for any SOC that is monitoring your organizations. Hopefully, I answered your question in that long-winded answer.
Yeah, yep, I think so. It's just kind of tying back to the operational complexity piece. All right, so I think that's all the questions we've got today. Thanks everybody for your time and paying attention and hanging out with us for a little while. And thanks for being part of the SonicWall family. Have a great day.